welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, back from Barcelona and now on the railways. London commuters from the plush boroughs of the southeast of England are uniting in solidarity with one of the most militant trade unions in the country. They have had enough of high fares, nightmare journeys and trains so overcrowded that even the leader of Her Majesty's opposition can't get a seat for love nor money. They are uniting in one cry of back to the future, a return to public ownership of the railways. Take a look at these dramatic figures from a recent opinion poll. Public ownership is backed by more than 3-to-1 among the general public, while even among what used to be the bowler-hatted brigade of ABCs, support for nationalisation carries a very clear majority. But can this unlikely alliance of London commuters and trade unions hold together? In this week's show, we examine the case for public ownership and talk to the main railway union, the RMT, about their proposals. And in the absence of a full government response, we talk to a historian to lend a sense of perspective. But first, over to Tasmina in the studio for your tweets, your emails and your messages.
Now, we've had some reaction to the last in our series of Catalonia, which aired last week. Gavin says, the show interviews are absolutely brilliant, so informative and lets the people speak and give their points without butting in. What a novelty. In my opinion, it gets better week by week. Thank you so much, Gavin. Shirley tweets in relation to the show we did with the Catalan economists and says, the show gave new meaning to applied economics. Alex's interviews of 3 economists was educational about Catalonia and, by analogy, Scotland. They demonstrated how small countries can succeed. Gino emails in to say a good video presentation. Well, thank you very much, Gino, for emailing from abroad to contact us. Now, of course, not everybody shared positive views in relation to the future of Catalonia and indeed Scotland in the European Union. Polly says, Catalonia is testament to the vicious thuggery of the EU and absolute proof Scotland will never be given membership. Spain is an EU member. If it had broken the fundamental principles of the EU, presumably the EU would have said so. And finally, Jill says, enjoyed your guests from Catalonia. Been interesting to hear their opinions. Now, feelings are running high in the ongoing rail debate. Here's a selection of street reaction outside Euston Station. Not a representative sample, of course, but it still matches the polls.
I mean, certainly if one has a chance of booking ahead, you can get very good value, but it doesn't really seem like the way to run a transport service. I mean, you know, it's infrastructure and it really should be, you know, immediate connectivity should be there at a reasonable price, as it is in other countries.
Train prices in the UK is quite exorbitant. They're far too high, especially when you travel in Europe and see this way for a longer distance. The trains are quite bad. With the growth of the economy in the country, that's what we need to do. And the north of the country haven't got that many things going for them at the moment.
I think it's getting ridiculous. It's getting very expensive for people to travel around the country. In a lot of places, the trains are not modern. You know. Yes, we know we have to find money to get these trains in, but it's just money just seems to be, its price seems to be going up all the time. I think they need to generate money, and I think privatisation in some ways is probably seen by some people as being the main way to go. I know there's a lot of talk from the Labour Party about trying to get it back to owned by the country. So
at the moment, I think they're definitely reliable. Virgin trains are excellent because they're run by Virgin. They tend to be pretty consistently good, apart from East Coast, but obviously they don't look after that anymore. In terms of pricing being reasonable, it's not the cheapest service, but it only takes 2 hours and 15 minutes for me to get from Euston to Piccadilly, so it's not bad.
I'm now delighted to be joined by Steve Headley, the Assistant General Secretary of the largest railway union, the RMT. Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, Steve.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Alex.
Now, you, in common, it should be said, with the other railway unions, have been campaigning hard for a return to public ownership. But many people, or some people at least, say privatisation has resulted in lots more people using the railways. Is there not a contradiction there?
Well, not really. I think that the growth in population has accounted largely for the people using the railways, and just the price of petrol and other forms of transport has made railways really quite economical to use up until lately. But I think that the main reason behind our quest to renationalise the railway is the government's own figures show that a privatised system is over 3 times more expensive to run than a nationalised system.
But some of these railway companies are actually publicly owned companies in their own countries. I mean, like Abellio is publicly owned in the Netherlands. Are they any better than these privatising pillagers, as you call it?
Well, at the end of the day, we have got nationalised railways in Britain. It's just not British nationalised railways, and it's one of the great sort of contradictions, if you like, that every country in Europe can seem to make a profit out of British railways, but the British government says that it can't.
Now, I've been looking at the information of the Railway Delivery Group, which is the consortium which promotes the interests of the various companies who are in the railways. And they argue, if you compare like with like and look across Europe, then, as they put it, the modal shift towards the UK is greater than any other country in the whole continent of Europe towards the railways.
Well, I mean, that's probably correct, because there's a thing coming in next year called the Fourth Railway Bill. And basically what that's done, a tremendous piece of legislation. It's taken the worst system in the entire Europe, the most customer dissatisfaction, the most expensive system, on average 5 times higher prices than what people pay on the continent. And it's opening that up and putting it right across Europe. There's going to be compulsory competitive tendering for every franchise in Europe. And what that's about is what it was about in Britain. It's markets that were previously closed off to private capital because they were nationalised, being opened up to privateers to go in and make a profit out of them.
But Steve Headley, can you look, or can the RMT look across Europe and say, there's a country which knows how to run its railways? I mean, is Germany doing a great job? Is France doing a great job? Is it an example of the sort of railway you'd like to see run in the modern age?
Well, to be honest, I think that any nationalised railway in Europe is doing better than Britain. I mean, that's the starting point. I mean, we don't want a return to the old values of British Rail, where we had a top-down management structure, a kind of feudal system, if you like. What we want is an industry that takes shareholders and stakeholders in the industry, like the trade unions, like the passenger groups, like democratically elected local authorities, and we want the plan and infrastructure and plan investment along those lines.
But if we look back to the days of British Rail, you describe as a feudal structure. Now, astonishingly, people still remember the beaching cuts. I don't think there's another example of a government initiative to chop about a third of the railway, which is still remembered to this day. I mean, it's still in people's lips, the beaching cuts. So that happened under a publicly owned system. How could you guarantee the same sort of chopping wouldn't happen again?
Well, the guarantee for that is that we have strong trade unions and a decent Labour Party. I mean, I think beaching was an absolutely massive own goal in the long term. A lot of lines are being reopened. I think the environmental damage that the beaching cuts have done are probably yet to be assessed. So I think that we're looking forwards. We think we need a democratically controlled railway system that's properly invested in, that's cheap. I mean, when people are paying 5 times less on the continent, people in this country are getting really ripped off for a terrible service.
And of course, some of the biggest prices are in the London commuting runs. I mean, did you think when you came into trade union politics that you'd be standing shoulder to shoulder with some of these bowler-hatted commuters coming into the City of London?
Well, I've lived in London for, 30 years now. And the services have never been fantastic, but the level of overcrowding now is something else. And that, again, that boils down to lack of investment, because the technology is there now that you could run more trains. But the decision has been taken because these franchises are awarded every 5 or 6 years. Maybe you get 8 years out of them. There's no real incentive for private companies to invest long term in easing that congestion on the trains and making commuters' lives easier. What they want to do is get in, make a quick buck and get back out again.
Have you got a structure in mind for a publicly owned railway? How would we avoid the British Rail feudal structure, as you called it? How could you see a new structure for a new publicly owned railway?
Well, I think John McDonnell and the Labour Party has actually forwarded a blueprint for that. And what he's talking about is a democratically controlled railway. You would have consumer groups. You would have, for example, London Transport, or TfL, as they're now called. You would have trade unions, and that would be the body that would jointly control in a democratic way how the railway system operated and what investment took place.
And can you point to a like-to-like comparison from the last few years, which indicates that perhaps a publicly owned railway runs better than a privately operated one?
Well, absolutely. If you look at the East Coast Main Line, which has now been rebranded LNER, the only time that actually delivered a profit was when it was in the public sector for nearly 2 years. It put millions back into the Treasury. And then we've got...
So it was privately run, then publicly run, now privately run again, and now publicly run again.
Yes, indeed. And the private firms actually handed back the keys 3 times in total, because what they do, the contract is loaded, so at the start of the contract they make greater profits, and as the contract goes on, the subsidies decrease that they get from the government. So what they do, they run it for the first few years, they cream off all the profit, and then they hand back the keys.
So if we look at the structure of a new publicly owned system, which would have the benefit of having an integrated structure, wouldn't it be an argument for having an integrated trade union representation? I mean, you're the largest of the rail workers' union by some distance. Wouldn't there be an argument for having a single union operating for railway workers, so as we didn't have disputes among unions as well as disputes between unions and management?
Well, absolutely. We're an industrial union. We're not for a bit of privilege for the higher paid grades or a bit of privilege for people who wear white-collar work. We organise right across the railway industry, and we'd encourage everybody to join the RMT.
Well, with that advert for your union, can I thank you for being on the Alex Salmond Show? And I don't know if there's going to be a single railway workers' union, Steve, but I know we're going to present you with the Alex Salmond Quake. Now, you know the drill, and you don't have to wait to your next visit to ScotRail. Whiskey in the Quake, and then toast your fellow workers.
Okay, thank you very much. It's lovely.
Great pleasure, Steve. Thank you. Coming up after the break, I speak to historian Michael Fry, a man who has made a particular study of the East Coast Line to Scotland, which has veered back and forward between the private and the public sectors.
Welcome back. Now, not everybody is in favour of renationalisation. Transport Secretary Chris Grayling thinks it's a very bad idea. This is what he has to say in the House of Commons.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I know I'm going to hear a lot today about nationalising everything. It is, of course, worth remembering, we've heard today, that the cost of renationalising our water companies would cost £90 billion. We've heard nothing about the cost of renationalising the railways, not just losing the private investment, bringing all those new trains, but actually the billions of pounds of bringing those trains back on to the public books. So we remain committed to the success of a private railway.
And now to give some further perspective, Alex is joined by historian and political commentator Michael Fry.
Michael, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Good to be here, Alex.
Let's start on the East Coast Line, because that is a railway which was in private hands, then public hands, then private hands, public hands, private hands, and now back in public hands. Does that give us an insight into how best to run a railway?
I have to say that whoever hands it's been in, that particular line has never made much of a profit, and in fact it's often made a loss, simply because there's not that much commercial and industrial traffic up the east coast of Great Britain. The only really profitable long-distance line in Britain is the line between London and Glasgow, simply because Glasgow and Clydeside in general was a producer of heavy goods, of steel and ship and so on. And these kinds of activities attracted a lot of railway traffic. And that's never been true of the East Coast Line.
But in recent years, the East Coast Line seems to have been a success when it was in public hands. Then it went back into the private sector. Now it's been handed back to the public sector. Is there an insight there? Even a difficult line to run might be better in the public sector.
Well, of course, since privatisation in 1990, there has been a tremendous increase in traffic on that line. The only trouble is it hasn't produced profits for the railway companies involved. This is because, I mean, the railways are a means of long-distance mass travel, and so the prices really have to be kept low. Otherwise, people won't travel on them. On the other hand, prices really have to be high in order to finance the investment for new technologies and various other improvements on the railways to keep those railways running, you know, according to the latest, the best standards available. So we've had the paradox of an increase in traffic amid deteriorate or quite poor service and not earning enough for reinvestment.
Are you saying that when it comes to railways, it's much easier to make money on short haul than it is on long haul?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. The long haul railways which seem to work are the high-speed railways as we see them in Europe. Going from Germany to the Channel ports or eastwards to Warsaw and Prague is an absolute pleasure. High speeds, high level of service, and these railways are doing well. But Britain is quite a small country, so it's in terms of area, so it's quite hard to find effective long-term or long-distance railway stretches which will make a profit. I mean, I think probably London to Glasgow would be a good one to try, but unfortunately, the British government, in their wisdom, are not trying that. So they're trying only from London to Birmingham, which is bound to be a disaster.
But they're going to get to Glasgow sometime in the next century, are they not?
Well, so they tell us, but that's I'm not sure railways are going to last that long because
But I'm just interested in one thing before we go on to the future of the railways. I mean, you're a well-known privateer. By the inclination, you're on the right of centre. You believe in privatising virtually everything. So aren't you in favour of privatised railways?
Well, I'm also, being a right-wing, I'm also a pragmatist. I'm not a dogmatist like men of the left. Indeed, I was in favour of all the privatisations of the Thatcherite era, and of course some of them, telecoms have been a huge success. But railways have been a failure. Absolutely, privatisation of railways has been a complete disaster from beginning to end.
So what is it about the railways that make it so difficult to run in the private sector?
Well, as I say, because you cannot generate the revenue in order to keep up with technological improvements, as you obviously can in telecoms. I mean, that's what, in the old days you used to have to apply to the government for a telephone. Now you can just walk into a shop and buy the latest.
And you can get any colour as long as it's black.
Exactly. So, but railways are not like that. I mean, railways are essentially Victorian technology. I mean, they're on a par with the hot air balloon or the penny farthing bicycle.
But surely the government's investing, perhaps 50 billion, perhaps a lot more, in this high-speed rail, which is going to take some time. Are you saying they're investing all of that capital in a technology which is essentially outdated?
Well, the technology is outdated. I think in the 21st century, railways will die and be replaced by new forms of transport.
But how can you possibly say that? I mean, there's been I think almost a doubling of passenger numbers in the last 30 years.
But the service is woeful. I mean, if you go even on some long-distance services, you'll have to stand all the way. This is not, I think, in the long run, a standard of service which people are going to accept.
But we can't sit around and wait for, a Star Trek transporter to take us from A to B. In the meantime, surely fast rail, comfortable rail is the best option.
But who's going to pay for it? I mean, there's no money to... you can invest, several billions of pounds in a high-speed service, as the government would like to do from London to Birmingham. But there's no guarantee this is going to produce any better service.
So in the relatively short term, before other means of smart cars or whatever, smart electric cars would have to be for the environment, come into being, how would you think the best thing could be done to run the railway right now?
There's no solution to this problem. As I say, it's a legacy of the 19th century. I do not believe there is any way of running British railways, at least, in an efficient and profitable way, with a guarantee of comfort for all passengers. I don't believe this concept is capable of realisation. Therefore, we'll just have to jog along until the whole environment is changed by new means of transport.
Would your advice be to divert the £50 billion plus going into this fast rail from London to Birmingham and perhaps elsewhere to making the current services more efficient, more comfortable, more spacious, with modern communications like Wi-Fi and chill phone chargers?
Well, chance would be a fine thing. Chance would be, I mean, that's what we're told that the railway at its best will provide us. But it's a very patchy performance, and on the whole, I would say the rail services in this country are still poor. as anyone who's travelled on any foreign railways will be able to tell you.
Well, Michael Fry, you've given us some trenchant views going back through history, looking at some alarming future predictions. Will you regret the demise of the railway? Was it not a big nostalgia there, the night mail crossing the border, that sort of stuff?
Well, yes. I used to love riding on the railways before they were ever privatised, at least in first class. They provided an absolutely excellent service with smooth, clean linen and silver cutlery, and you could sit and have your morning bacon and eggs while the sun rose over the North Sea, and it was an absolutely delightful experience.
One of my last decisions as First Minister of Scotland was to order the new sleeper carriages, which are just about to be introduced at the present moment. Now, could that recapture one aspect? Because the sleeper service from London to Scotland, or Scotland to London, used to be an enormous thing. You went up to play golf, or in the olden days for a bit of shooting, maybe less in the olden days actually. But could that be a niche thing that would make that aspect of travel with a proper cabin with en-suite facilities and the rest, could that be a revival in the sleeper service?
Yes, I think so, because that was a huge convenience also for people from Scotland who had to do business in London. And as to send you off to sleep in Edinburgh or Glasgow, you could order a dram or two from the carriage attendant.
I'm sure you did.
And then you would rock gently through the night and awake refreshed in London. So it's that level of service that I'm afraid privatisation, paradoxically, killed. Privatisation was supposed to produce improvements in service, and it did precisely the opposite.
Now, Michael, you say that railways are a thing of the past, but look at the opening of the Borders Railway. I mean, a long stretch of line, which I think carries now over a million passengers. Surely that's been an outstanding success.
Yes, I'm not sure how much money it makes.
And good news for the Borders.
It's good news for the Borders. The Borders people are very happy, although when they start getting new housing estates and lots of commuter traffic, I'm not sure they're going to remain so happy. That line has particular drawbacks as it doesn't go all the way through the stretch. It doesn't go from one side of the Borders to the other. It's only got a single track.
But couldn't it make money as, let's say, a great scenic railway, because
Indeed.
It's an hour down from the largest station in Scotland, Waverley Station in
Yes.
Edinburgh. Many of the scenic railways of the world, as you're well aware, you have to travel for long distances to get there and back.
Yes.
Surely that could be making money from the Borders.
Yes, and it is a scenic route because the railway itself runs on a higher level. It runs at kind of treetop level. So if you've been used to driving down that road, the trees obscure everything, but now the vistas open up. So it's actually a very fine line. I'm all in favour of it.
So there might be a future for the railways after all.
If it is... Yes, but you have to take each project seriously. I mean, there ought to have been double tracks on that line, and it ought to have gone all the way from Edinburgh to Carlisle. Official hesitation, civil servants saying, oh, but have you thought of this minister, have you thought of that minister? Cautious, pussyfooting investment is not the way to go.
Now, I have to ask you, Michael, you're based in Edinburgh, we're conducting this interview in London. How did you get down to London for the interviews? Were you in a plane or were you on the rail?
I was on the railway, yes. But this is because I'm a bit of a railway buff, and I will always travel by railway unless it's absolutely unavoidable.
Well, listen, I'm sure they got you here. I can see that. I'm sure they'll get you back. And in the meantime, so as you can celebrate and comfort your journey, can I present you with Alex Salmond Quake? I don't have to tell you the drill, but as you know, only Scotch.
Absolutely. And of course they do. On the railways at the moment, they do serve Scotch, though I must say of a rather inferior blend.
Well, I expect you to pass it round your fellow passengers.
Yes, well, it won't go very far round.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, Alex.
What a way to run a railway. And next week we turn to another hot issue, fast rail or HS2. Is it the future of rail, or is it an old solution to 21st century problems, redundant before it's even built? We speak to the people and the communities at the sharp end of fast rail. You and your lady wife running it, how long was it in the family? What did it mean to you?
When we bought it, it was called the Jolly Gardeners, and my wife and I sadly lost one of our twins named Brie Louise back in 2003. So we asked Camden Licensing if we could change the name of it, and fortunately they granted us that permission, and it's been the Brie Louise ever since.
So it's more than just a a business. There's a huge emotional attachment you had in these premises.
Oh, and it was our house and our home for 15 years as well.
So what kind of community was Colbert Street?
Oh, unbelievable, honestly.
So what do we learn today about the railways? Well, first, the proponents of the present twin-track system, and it's an ever-diminishing band, that is public ownership of infrastructure, private operation of the trains, they say with some merit that the railway traffic is increasing faster than any other country in the world, that safety has improved, and that under the old British Railways Board, the spectre of Dr. Beecham stalked the land. But that was a long time ago. And now there is no problem getting people to use the trains. The problem is squeezing them all onto the trains. The momentum for an integrated public ownership model is now very strong. But whatever happens, is it too much to expect that in 21st century Britain, we can work out a system of how to make the trains run on time with seats for all the passengers? And now from Taz and me and all at the Alex Salmond Show, it's goodbye for now.